my channel. Instead of a regular review, like, what?
Nothing. I'm standing here. I'm here to participate.
Are you too?
I sure am. I'm here.
So with this video, as you can see, it's not just me. It is two of my friends, Justin and Jared. And they're here to celebrate something with me. The fact that this year we're getting the 12th and possibly final Star Wars movie. At least final one for a while. And so with that, there are 12 months in a year. And so I'm going to be posting a discussion-based review of each Star Wars movie each month up until then. But the sad thing is, month one, we aren't necessarily starting off all that good.
Monsters out there, leaking in here, all sinking and no power? When are you thinking we are in trouble?
Power's back.
Huh?
Right now, we are either gonna crap all over this film or admit that it actually isn't as bad as people may say it is. So, here we go.
Not my least favorite Star Wars movie.
No, not mine either. No.
I think that can be pretty universally said that it's not the worst. No matter what your metric for the worst Star Wars film is, it won't be the worst.
See, I think why people thought it was the worst Star Wars movie up to that point is because 20 years ago, when that came out, it was the first bad not first bad Star Wars movie, but at least the first disappointing one. So I think that's why its reputation has kind of lingered over the years, you know? Because so many people were expecting something that reached the quality of the originals, and who can blame them? But then you have this movie that lets them down with a number of reasons, which we'll get into.
Midichlorians. The worst part of the whole movie.
I think you're jumping ahead, Justin. We're getting to the worst part a little bit too early. We need to start with something positive.
Hey, who said we had to go in order, though? Or in terms of positivity.
I had to get that out into the ether. I dislike the part about this that really irks me is the midichlorians that just took made an explanation for something that didn't need to be explained. I think the Force in the first one was just the cool power that had sort of a mysticism or specialness about it that was really cool, and you really couldn't explain it, it just happened, and then they made it bacteria in the bloodstream, and just not my favorite part of it.
Yeah, I've said this before in some of my reviews, like written and spoken, about how like it's not good to subvert expectations. If the way you're subverting expectations is like it's not satisfying, then that's what that is. The original movies had this whole thing about faith and allowing that to kind of like let the Force be built within you, and then yeah, like you said, it's just hey, it's bugs that are causing these things in your bloodstream, you know?
These microscopic organisms. But once it was just this magic that just permeated everything. It was just this beautiful, this kind of overarching guide that we could tap into occasionally, but we really couldn't control. We really couldn't just like take over it. And we couldn't understand it. But then, no, we've been understanding this for decades, for millennia. We've got these little microscopic organisms. You just take this little Gillette razor and we can just kind of like poke it into you and find out how many you have. Just as easy as that. That's how strong you are in the Force. Who needs guidance? Midichlorians.
You know, some of the other issues I have with this movie is that like it's just so cringy at times, you know?
Yes, it is. Especially with Jake Lloyd as Anakin, and some of this can be blamed for George Lucas directing, and some of it can be that just Jake Lloyd was young and didn't really know what he was doing as far as an actor. I don't know, but lots of what he says is very cringy, especially when you first meet him and he's in the junk shop, and the first thing he says to Padme is,
"Are you an angel?" What?
You're just like out of nowhere, this kid that you have no idea who he is yet, he just blurts out this weird, I don't know, it's just, lots of what he says is cringy in this movie.
I feel like if you're going to be using a child actor, you kind of have to like focus them in on a single trait. Like this child actor is adorable. This child actor is tragic. This child actor is like really cool somehow. But with Anakin, they kind of just like threw him into a blender and just tried to hope for the best, because this part is tragic. This part is supposed to be funny, I guess. But this part, yeah, I have no idea what's going on with this part, but we'll see what happens.
This part he's supposed to be a 9-year-old kid. Now he's supposed to be the Jedi that we all thought he was going to be, and he's a jungle man.
sense. Ooh, and here's the foreshadowing for Darth Vader. Can't forget that. We need to throw in as much of that as possible.
Yes.
As if we didn't know that was gonna happen.
Who could this Anakin child be?
Right.
Maybe he'll be important one day.
Also, one of the funniest parts about this that became a meme was when, have you seen that meme where it talks about how he's like, Mr. Qui-Gon, sir, I don't want to be a problem. And then the subtitle proceeds to be the biggest problem in the whole galaxy ever.
Yeah.
That's pretty much sums up every part of Jake Lloyd's Anakin.
The Skywalkers are literally like the biggest screw-ups in any franchise ever.
Yeah.
Just look at the body count that's left over from the dumb decisions they made over the years, and you're just like,
Yeah.
who can blame them for all the hate they launch against Darth Vader and stuff? Now, that being said, like, I think Jake Lloyd, you know, as much as people have basically ruined his life for hating on him, you can't really blame him too much for that, because so much of this movie, while it is George Lucas's vision, so many of the decisions he made creatively and with directing and writing and everything, it just doesn't work for some reason. Like, I don't know,
Pacing is a little bit off. On a rewatch, the pacing of this movie is a little bit like, we go really fast and then we slow down a tick or two, and then we go really fast and then slow down. It's like trying to kind of choppy.
Mm-hmm. Well, I agree. Like, that stuff happened in A New Hope too. But what I've thought about over the years, especially in talking with other people, is that this movie isn't just like oddly paced. It feels that way when you're watching it, because the first act of this movie presents a conflict of, you know, Naboo being under attack by the Trade Federation, and all this stuff is being set up. But then suddenly, when all the main characters are trapped on Tatooine and then go to Coruscant, it's like that conflict is still there, but it almost looks like the movie goes in a completely different direction from what you're invested in.
Yeah.
So that's why it feels slow and kind of like just underwhelming. It feels off the course of where it should be, you know?
I always felt there's a problem with emotional tone as well.
Yeah.
Like, you've got this kind of sensation that the droid army is invading Naboo, and they're just this overwhelming army of these incredible machines that have sent Jedi on the retreat. And then you have Jar Jar just dancing along, and he's flipping around, and Obi-Wan has to save his life, and Qui-Gon has to save his life, and everyone's saving his life. Where's the tension from the droid army that was there for 10 seconds before we had to throw in Jar Jar? Or we had to throw in a quip here? Or we had to throw in something going on? And this happens throughout the movie, like, ooh, this is a really serious moment. Oh, and there's something going on in the background that's just kind of dumb. And then there's this really emotional moment. And then there's something else that's going on that just completely has a different tone. This happens again and again and again. It feels like George Lucas did not have anyone that was willing to rein him in, like he did for the earlier films before that, 4, 5, and 6.
What's interesting about New Hope and then Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, George Lucas's wife actually worked on the script and worked with him to keep it toned down and everything. And I mean, after the movies they split up, and I think this just happened after that. And so I agree with you. There was a lot that could have been reined in, but really wasn't.
One of my other biggest issues with this movie is just that you look back on it and it just looks so dated too.
Yes.
I think Attack of the Clones looks worse, and we'll get to that later next month. But like, you look at this movie and there's so many shots where they have all these amazing backgrounds, like with Naboo especially, but then you have like these really awkward looking Gungans running around. And especially nowadays when you watch movies and you have characters like Thanos from Avengers or Caesar from Planet of the Apes, and those guys look photorealistic in a way that like they will stand the test of time. But this looks like these characters look like computer graphics from a PS2 game, almost. Well, maybe not that bad, but like, you know, PS3 or something, you know?
And it's one of those things that at least I remember decently well enough that for the time everyone thought it was so amazing. It looked gorgeous. But then, like those PS2 games that you mentioned, it just didn't age as well.
Right.
Like some of those games that you can look back and it's like, well, it doesn't have high fidelity, it doesn't have high resolution, but it aged well. It has that kind of style to it that it just looks good even today.
Right.
But Phantom Menace does not. Like like you can see the Gungan city in the background, that looked gorgeous. And it still looks really good. But then you see like the droids walking around, or the Gungans, as you mentioned, or some of the other aliens that show up randomly. Well, I think we'll get to him in a bit, but there is some bad CGI at different places.
There's also good parts of the movie, like when they're going through the planet core. I mean, that part's really fun and entertaining.
There's always a bigger fish.
Some of the fish in that scene look really cool, and some of them look terrible. Like the one that has the tongue that attaches to the back and grabs onto him, and they're like, "Oh no, we're gonna get eaten," and then gets eaten. It looks like it came out of like, I don't know. It looks funky, but then you look at some of the other ones that they do in the same sequence, and they're like, "Oh wow, this looks kind of cool." And those have aged well. The other thing is the pod race looks really cool.
Yes.
That has aged really well.
And how much of that is blur effects and how much of that is actually seeing all the details.
And the other thing is when you're doing the last battle between the Gungans and the battle droids, I actually was like watching that point and I was like, oh geez, this whole thing, I can't imagine that they went out into some green field and filmed this somewhere. They had to have just generated this on a computer, the whole shebang. It really doesn't, I don't know, it doesn't hold up well against like something like Empire Strikes Back, where the visuals still today are still really, really, really good. Where they haven't aged badly, they still look really good. And that was in 1980. Like, I don't feel like Phantom Menace has that excuse to, as far as timing goes.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of it just kind of feels like a tech demo for a lot of that stuff. And frankly, a lot of it was, and you got to applaud George Lucas for that, especially with some of the stuff he did in Attack of the Clones or Revenge of the Sith. But yeah, it just doesn't hold up well. And back to your point about the pod race too, it's so dang entertaining to watch. And like, it's a great scene, but then it kind of points to the whole issue that I think all of us kind of have with the Phantom Menace overall. It's just that you have these great moments, and then you also have these really bad or just really cringeworthy moments here and there, and it all just kind of adds up to a mess of a movie that honestly I don't think deserves as much hate as it gets. But a lot of the negative points are validated anyway.
It's true. We have, on one hand, you have Darth Maul, one of the coolest characters in all of the Star Wars movies. I mean, he gets the Boba Fett treatment a little bit, where he gets just slaughtered at the end of this movie and died.
Well,
but
at least he comes back.
He comes back in Clone Wars and Rebels, and he ends up being fleshed out, and he's a cooler character now. But back then, when we just had the Phantom Menace, it was like, come on. Like,
There's another one-off.
Right. The pod race, the Ewan McGregor's Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon and their dynamic, and you get to meet the Jedi and Mace Windu and Yoda and Ki-Adi-Mundi and all these people that eventually during the prequel trilogy will have a hand in everything. But you meet all these cool guys that I mean, they've gone off and written stories about all of them. They end up being pretty cool. And you have Ian McKellen as Palpatine, and you can see how he manipulates both sides. He's a really good actor. I liked him in Phantom Menace. And I kept liking him through all the other movies too.
Mm-hmm. Well, he was actually the Emperor in Return of the Jedi.
Well, yeah, he was in Return of the Jedi, and they brought him back, and he's good. I like him as an actor.
There was something that I was taught when I was back in high school literature course, is that when you're writing something and you just have this block and you can't get past this block, you write to the events. You write the stuff that you're excited about, and you write those big events and those big events and big events, but then you try to fill in. And the filling in is the hard part. And you can kind of see that with Phantom Menace, is that he's got these big events. He's got the big first attack on the droid ship, then he's got the big event in Theed, and then he's got the pod race, and then he's got all these big events that are really exciting and are generally our favorite parts of the movie.
Right.
But then he has the filling in part, and that's where we have all the problems. It feels like he had all these big events planned, but he had no idea how to get the characters from one of these big events to the next. Exactly. In a way that actually looked and sounded good.
It feels like a lot of filler, especially when you get into the Senate and they have all of the bureaucratic nonsense that unfortunately permeates the rest of the trilogies, or the rest of the prequel movies, I should say. That it's just, aside from maybe the E.T. Easter egg where you can see E.T.'s aliens in the corner, I mean, bureaucratic stuff is most of my problem with all the prequel movies, but especially in this movie, because it grinds the pace of the movie that's been kind of building up where you have the pod race, and you meet Darth Maul, and he fights Qui-Gon, and you're like, oh wow. And then you're like, oh, Anakin's gonna go to the Jedi Council and get tested. And then it just grinds to a screeching halt in the Senate. And then it gets back up and goes into the rest of the movie.
Well, I think we've pretty much covered the bases here. Like, are there any other comments you want to leave on it, like negative or positive, either way?
I feel we've already mentioned a bit of the casting, but the casting really was excellent.
Spot on.
Yes.
Because a lot of the characters, even though some of their lines were dumb, even though the direction that they were taken was not that good, a lot of the characters worked really well with what they had.
Mm-hmm.
Liam Neeson as Qui-Gon Jinn is still beloved by most fans, even though he was the one that was saying all the midichlorian garbage for the first place.
Yes.
Because he worked with what he had. Ewan McGregor is still beloved as Obi-Wan.
Yeah.
Natalie Portman, as much as some fans aren't a fan of her, she still did a great job.
And she's done great things since then. I mean, like, it was a good springboard for her to continue to launch her career, for sure.
Absolutely.
All
So,
of them have done great things since then too, actually.
and so just every single acting choice that they made, even down to Darth Maul's actor, even though they cut most of his lines from the final product, did a great job with what they had. And so it seemed like that vision was still there. It was just the execution that was really, really lacking.
I think my last point will be that, you know, I pretty much agree. I'm pretty much on board with what you guys have been saying. But what I really appreciate about the Phantom Menace is that despite its problems and the bad execution and everything like that, what it did for Star Wars, I think, is something that can't be ignored. It triggered a beginning for the expanded universe that the sequels, as good as they are, admittedly haven't done. There is so much random stuff going on with the expanded universe now, with like all these books and tie-ins and everything, that it all just kind of, it feels too big within itself to really be tracked and to catch up with. But everything that springboarded off this movie and the other prequels, I feel like was really exciting with the way the story's expanding. We've got all those great games we can look back on.
Pod Racer on the N64.
Yeah, the Star Wars Starfighter game, the Battlefront games. A ton of great ones, you know?
It definitely brought it back into the public eye.
That's true.
In a good way. Because Star Wars, as good as it was back in the 70s and 80s, was still just Star Wars back in the 70s and 80s. And there was comics, there were a couple of video games of varying quality, and there was a lot of books that came out in that time period, and some of those were great, some of those were practically fan fiction. They were horrible. But what the Phantom Menace did is that it brought it back in a big way, and everyone was talking about it. Star Wars wasn't just something that happened to our dads and moms. It was the new huge thing, and that's what it started out with The Force Awakens, because you saw it everywhere. It was on oranges, for crying out loud. But then it kind of just was too much, like you said. It was just too much too quickly. And it kind of died out.
I think my favorite thing, just one final thing, because this needs to be mentioned. One of the best things to come out of Phantom Menace, among other things, was Duel of Fates.
Ooh.
Like, that's like the quintessential Star Wars song. I mean, among all the other things that John Williams has done, the music in this movie has to be acknowledged a little bit, because Duel of Fates, they included it in this one. They put it in episode 3 later on. They put it in every Star Wars game. Well, not every one, but it's come out, like Battlefront 2, it's still one of the coolest songs on Battlefront 2 when you play it online. Like, it was the song that I sang when I had my toy lightsaber. That was the song that I sang while I would fight with my brothers. Like, it's one of the coolest ones in the whole Star Wars mythos.
No, I totally agree. It's also that song when you try to embarrassingly impress your friend when you go with the piano, you're like, I say that because I was that kid, so.
Yeah.
Providing the monastic stuff in the background.
Everybody has their version of what they say in the choir and all that. If nobody's seen Star Wars, you have to start them out at episode 1. I mean, New Hope obviously is one of the best, but I mean, episode 1 is where it all starts, I guess.
So Justin, final score for the movie out of 10.
Oh, probably 6.5, I think, for me. Out of 10, 6.5.
For me, I do letter grades now, so I'm going to give it a C.
I would give it a 7 because I remember watching it as a little kid, and in the theater, I was blown away. And while it's definitely got its flaws, and while it's definitely got its shortcomings, I still love it for what it is and what it was.
So that was our discussion on the Phantom Menace. Thank you for taking all this time to watch us nerd out about this messy, but you know what? It was kind of mediocre movie, so you know. I enjoyed talking about it. I hope you enjoyed listening to us talk about it, and look forward to when I'll have another guest on to talk about Attack of the Clones next month. And as always, please subscribe if you like this video. Also check out my Facebook page for more content and reviews. And you guys have a great day. Thank you for watching.
Ciao.